Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we're here for my LPL Round 3 overview and analysis. I know I've been pumping out a lot of LPL videos as of recent, but the schedule in the LPL is back to back to back to back. No days off in terms of what they do in the playoffs, so I gotta get these videos out on time. I hope you fans of some other regions can understand maybe why the LPL gets a little bit pushed out more than some of the other regions, but we're going to be covering round number 3 in this video, and this is a very important round because this is the final round before you get to the top 4, and of course top 4 is confirmed at the very least to have another shot in lower bracket. That's when lower bracket technically starts, right? Losing in the top 4 means you get another chance to be able to play your way in. But not so much in round number 3. If you are out today, you are out for the rest of the playoffs. And so a big deal coming in here. Of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought was going to happen in the series. If you want to know my thoughts and my predictions, you can go ahead and check out my round 2 video. I go over all the round 2 games as well as give my predictions at the end. For these round 3 games, you can check that out up in the iCard right now. But I don't want to waste too much of your time. Let's go ahead and jump right into the analysis, and we're going to be kicking it off with the upper side of the bracket here, talking about the number 4 seeded Weibo Gaming taking on the number 5 seeded Bilibili Gaming, and this series is definitely interesting on paper. To me, a very close series between two teams that I think are pretty interchangeable in terms of what they do. They're very similar in how they like to play the game. I would say that, you know, very talented top sides, junglers that have high highs and low lows, two mid laners that are pretty historic and have had good years in the past but aren't exactly the most consistent in the entire world, and then two bot laners that bring up the consistency of the team by quite a bit. I really do like the matchup between both of these teams, and I think in my predictions, I went with Weibo. I think I went with Weibo in 5. It might have been Weibo in 4, but realistically, I think Weibo should be able to win this. They are the better team. That was my prediction going into the series, but BLG is certainly not counted out by any means. I think these two teams are incredibly similar. That's my analysis, is I think this should be like a 5-game series, and if not, it means one of them just didn't show up here today, because I really don't think talent-wise there is a ton of separation between Weibo and BLG. Of course, Weibo, I think, has had a little bit more consistency over the course of the year, but of course, we're going to be going game by game, talking about what happened in this series, and that means we got to start off with game number 1. You definitely want to gain the momentum in game 1 by jumping out to an early lead. So who's going to be able to gain that momentum? Well, the winner of game number 1 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take the first game in the series. They're able to do it in relatively dominant fashion. They are just the better team for a majority of this game. Early game's a little bit back and forth, but after I'll say a really bad Herald fight for Weibo Gaming that a couple of players I'm going to, shout out for on their side, I think BLG just held control basically for the rest of the game. Really impressive stuff coming out from a team that already looked really good in their round 2 matchup. They did a really good job taking care of an RNG team that, while I think there's a lot of problems with that roster right now, they're certainly not pushovers, so good for BLG. What ended up happening in the game, though? How did we end up getting there? Well, Weibo actually gets first blood in a weird skirmish that happens in Bot River. It ends up being 2 for 2 in the long run, but it looked like BLG should have just been able to win this skirmish. Unfortunately, the damage coming out wasn't all that good. You got with some really good stuns, but basically no follow-up, and on missing hook meant that there really wasn't a lot that they could do, and it ended up just being a 2 for 2 with Weibo getting a bit more gold because of that first blood. But BLG's bot lane strikes back basically immediately. The Blitzcrank comes into play with the June gank, and Elk is able to get on the board. And we'll talk about Elk. His damage this game was incredibly important. He was the big damage dealer for BLG, and honestly, he played really well. A lot of that translates up to the Herald fight. You're seeing this big, 4v4 that we are pretty typically seeing in the LPL around Herald at, 7-8 minutes into the game, and BLG is able to take this one pretty cleanly. In fact, Weibo really shouldn't have contested it at all in the first place. They were pretty low on resources at the time, and BLG picked a really good time to be able to all-in the Herald. Weibo just wasn't prepping for it, but they tried to contest it anyways. I think they end up losing Karsa for nothing there, and they also lose the Herald, which is just a net negative pretty much all around, and BLG generates a nice lead from that. That's not to mention the fact that Elk at this point is pretty far ahead. Bin ends up getting incredibly far ahead, which is what we'll talk about next. A couple of just unbelievable plays in the top lane. Weibo does try to invest some resources into killing Bin and trying to get the Shy on board, but an early 1v2 on the top side ends up with, you know, a 1v1 trade that Bin's able to get a kill in. And then the same thing happens in a 1v4 top side. They send 4 people top lane to kill this Gwen, and Bin is still able to get one back. It's an absolutely massive turn there to make that play equal at all, because Bin honestly was in a pretty bad spot, and for him to be able to play his way out of it, I think is really, really good. And it really just kind of encapsulates a lot of what Weibo was doing this game. They were slow on the draw, and even when they did make plays, they just weren't all that good. BLG had control of the entire map by 17 minutes, and then from that point onwards, it was just teamfight that BLG could win after teamfight that BLG could win. They eventually do close out the game. Some really good hooks from On in all of the late teamfights, and ridiculous amounts of damage coming out from the Zeri. Annie also with a really good game. I'll talk about that in a second, but player of the game is going to go to On this Blitzcrank. I think a lot of people want to give it to Bin, and I totally understand that. The outplays in the top lane were absolutely fantastic, but he did kind of put himself in some bad positions that necessitated him outplaying his opponents. He was pushing up without vision. You know, in a typical scenario, you're just kind of getting caught as a top laner there for no reason, and you know, he was obviously good enough to be able to play his way out of it, but I don't want to reward him too much for some of the mental mistakes that he was making in the mid part of this game, even if his hands were able to play his way out of it. But On, I think, was just fantastic throughout the entirety of this game. Blitzcrank is his best pick. It has been over the past year or so. He's playing against his former team, which is always really fun. And, you know, On Weibo last year was a big proponent of that Blitzcrank. He played it a ton. Being able to pull it out here on R5 to be able to enable this more pick-oriented comp with the Annie, with the Wukong, I think is a really smart idea, and it does play into the strengths of BLG very heavily, and man, he just executes every single time in team fights here. Those hooks are phenomenal. This pick has been pretty good pretty much every time it's been brought out globally, and that was certainly no different in this game. Elk was doing a majority of the damage towards the back half. He is the big BLG carry, and I think he's definitely stepped up in the playoffs so far, and this series he was really good as well, or this game I should say. He was really good as well. Once he was able to generate that lead in the early game off of the June gank, he basically never looked back. Once the Zeri is ahead of the Jinx, there's really not a lot that the Jinx is going to be able to do, especially when you look at the Weibo comp and you realize they don't really have a lot of peel in the late game outside of the Thresh, and so, you know, a lot of easy ways, especially with this pick comp, to be able to get onto that Jinx, or to at least force her out from doing her damage. And then the other players I want to shout out, Yagao. He was at like 140 CS by the time the game ended, which you're like, oh my god, that's horrible. Yeah, that's horrible, and it's because he was moving around the map all the time. The Annie was never in lane. It was constantly on the move with Wukong in the jungle, and that was a huge positive. Those stuns were massive in terms of being able to create opportunities for BLG to be able to capitalize on, and honestly, I think Yagao is going to get underrated for this performance. The teamfight prowess that he was able to show in this one was really good, even if the laning wasn't particularly great. June was good. I already talked about Bin. BLG honestly just team gapped them. They gapped them in every single lane. There really was no negatives coming out from them here. For Weibo on the other side, it's just frustrating that you made such poor decisions in the early game. I think if you were to go into the mid game with a little bit more of an even game state, if you don't try to contest that Herald, if you don't end up trading 1-for-1 in the top lane with these Bin engages, like, I do think this game is winnable. I think the Jinx is someone who absolutely can carry towards the back half of games right now, even if a lot of Reddit analysts will tell you that they can't. Xiaohu was really far ahead in terms of gold on Yagao because he was in lane actually farming, and so there was a bit of gold to go around. Unfortunately, the macro play from Weibo was pretty atrocious in this one, and I'm going to give dud of the game to Karsa for that. I'm not going to say it's entirely his fault, but he was often in the wrong place. Really wasn't making a lot of early game plays on the Lee Sin. You really need to see that champion be aggro in the early game, especially against something like a pick comp like Wukong, Blitzcrank, Annie, because you're just kind of opening up the door for them to be able to scale into the part of the game where they're going to capitalize on those picks in the mid game, and unfortunately Karsa just wasn't aggressive enough. I think that his willingness to go in was a little bit too low, and I think when he did go in, it was often the wrong time, so he's going to get my dud of the game, but you could very realistically give this to the Shy in the top lane, who just was really bad. This game completely outplayed by Bam, wasn't even remotely close. I don't think Chris was particularly good on the Thresh either. Not that Light and Zhao who could really do all that much, but Weibo just seemed kind of disjointed this game, and that's definitely concerning to see, because this is a team that, you know, has high highs and has low lows, and so if it's the low version of Weibo coming out, that's not very good. But hopefully this was just a game 1 mishap, and you're going to be able to bounce back in game 2. But for BLG, if you're able to take that game 2 yourself, you have full command and control of this series. It is going to be very difficult to beat BLG 3 games in a row if they go up 2-0. And so Weibo very much feels like this next game is a must-win. Are they going to be able to pull it out? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take game number 2 and put themselves up in this series 2-0, a commanding victory from them again here in game number 2. You thought game 1 was dominant, game 2 was worse, in my opinion. This was awesome from everybody on the side of BLG. It's going to be very difficult for me to find flaws in how they were able to play this one out, because honestly, it just felt like they controlled absolutely everything on the map. Some amazing macros, some amazing mechanical plays, great decision-making, great objective control. I mean, no negatives, like, all A's for me, for Bilibili Gaming, no notes. This was a really, really good game. And then for Weibo, on the other side, yikes. I mean, you look completely helpless in this series. There are a couple players that I think are playing relatively okay mechanically, but just like macro-wise, you are getting completely decimated. And I would say even most of the team is just getting completely outplayed in a lot of their 1v1 or 2v2 lanes. And so let's go ahead and talk about it. What ended up happening in this game? Well, Jun ends up getting first blood in the mid lane. A really good gank timing coming out here onto the Jace. It was actually just in time for the wave to get close to crashing for Yagao, and Lee Sin was exactly there the time that Karso wasn't. And so really good timing from Jun to be able to pick up that first blood for himself in the mid lane. But then we just get this big skirmish, I would say, in bot side jungle. There's really no other way to describe it. Sylas ends up taking the Maokai ult as soon as we hit 6, and it's a problem because Maokai ult is a really, really good ability, and Yagao hit 6 before everybody else, and so not good, I would say, on the side of Weibo to be able to take that fight. They just kind of get destroyed there. It ends up being like 3-0. The Shy gets picked on in the top lane a bit. That's not a theme that is going to go away in this game, I promise that. But then Weibo does try to pull some back. A really good fight, I would say, around the mid lane. A good disengage around Herald, where Bilibili decides to go all in. They feel like they have an advantage, and so they really want to fight here, but they go a little bit too deep. Weibo with a nice disengage, and then they are able to pick up some kills on the back end with, you know, BLG just going in a little bit too far, but, you know, it's a small respite because the rest of the game is basically just BLG running it down, or running it at them, I should say, not running it down. Weibo's running it down. Yagao tries to outplay a, like, 4-man dive in the bot lane. He doesn't end up surviving, but he does get literally everything out of Weibo Gaming, and then they just have nowhere to go. They get completely obliterated by BLG in the subsequent fight. And then we start the Bin show. Bin solos the Shy. And then Bin solos the Shy. And then Weibo Gaming send 5 people bot lane to try to kill Bin. And he survives. Like, it is completely unreal that he was able to survive that, but Bin is such a big nuisance in the side of Weibo Gaming, not only in these team fights, but in the side lane as well. You could argue that BLG is the best 1-3-1 team in the LPL. I've been talking about that all year long, and that came out here, man. They were perfect. When Bin was dragging a lot of the attention, they were for sure getting something else on the other side of the map. Just really impressive performances coming out of BLG, and then eventually they do get a full team fight to end the game, and the Gnar is just unstoppable. Yagao is dealing a ridiculous amount of damage, and the Zeri, I mean, oh my god, the damage coming out from Zeri was absurd. Player of the game has got to go to Bin for me. I know a lot of people are going to give it to Elk, and rightfully so. Like, Elk played phenomenal in this game, but how can I not give it to Bin with the amount of pressure that he was putting on Weibo? 2 solo kills, an escape in a 1v5, not to mention the fact that he 1v4'd in the previous game. Like, there are just so many things to like about Bin, and he is absolutely dominating this series. You know, obviously there's that meme that floats around on Reddit and on, you know, Twitter and whatever, that Bin can only play carries, and obviously that's not the case, but man, if you ever had any questions about that, go look at this game. He plays Gnar like a carry. Yeah, maybe you can only play carries because he makes every champion look like a carry. He's so ridiculously talented, and he's absolutely brutalizing the Shy in the top lane, and all of Weibo Gaming, quite frankly. Elk is the other player that I think you're really going to want to consider for player of the game. He's just been awesome through the first 2. He's been the highest damage player in both games, and it's been absolutely deserved. His positioning on Zeri is immaculate because not only is he really good at playing safe, and he knows, you know, when he needs to play back a little bit, but he is not afraid to flash in and go for the killing blow when he knows that a team fight is won if he just plays aggro. And that's what you want to see out of an AD carry. I talk about this all the time. That's the difference between a top-tier AD carry and a mid-tier AD carry, is the willingness to go in and make the game-winning play. And Elk is for sure an AD carry that is willing to make the game-winning play. We saw it multiple times this game. On was really good on the Leona. Sometimes he went a bit too deep, but for the most part, it was still really good. Jun was awesome this game, just everywhere he needed to be, and Yagao was better with Maokai ult than Maokai was. And so basically all positives coming out from BLG. Another example of them just absolutely dominating the game. But then for Weibo on the other side, again, I've already talked about it a bit, but this team just had nothing going for them in this game. There was just no positive. Xiaohu getting destroyed in the early game and not really having any impact on the game at all. I mean, the Jace, I think, did negative damage. Carson not even being relevant for his ultimate because Ygal's was just better. Light and Crisp really had no pressure the entire game. I think you could talk about Light not necessarily being the problem, but he's not exactly the solution in a lot of these games either. And then my dud of the game has to go to the Shy. How could it possibly go to anybody else? You're playing Kennen into Gnar, which is a matchup that you can relatively play easily. Like, it's not, Freelo like Kennen's matchup into, some of these other tanks that are meta right now, but it is certainly playable, and Kennen ultimate should just be relevant. All you have to do is not get obliterated, and he got obliterated. Solo killed twice in the top lane. No good Kennen ults. He was doing 0 damage towards the back half of the game. Down a billion CS, giving up towers. Just no pressure at all. Like, this is not good. He's been really bad over the first 2 games, and that's concerning because, the Shy kind of dictates the temperature, I would say, that Weibo Gaming is on. Now, I think players like Karsa and Xiaohu also fall into this category, but when the Shy is playing well, when he's playing, at his level where he can be at his best, this is a really good team, but when he's not, like, we've seen this team lose to worse teams than BLG consistently over the course of the regular season, and unfortunately, it looks like you're getting the bad version of the Shy. Karsa, like I said, was bad. Xiaohu was bad. Light and Crisp really weren't, like, moving the needle at all. Weibo's just not playing well, and things absolutely have to turn around for this team, or else they are going to get swept incredibly easily by BLG, and that's really, like, you gotta win Game 3 now. Game 3 coming up. It is a must-win for Weibo, or you are out, and this is a team that certainly does not want to be outside of the top 4. This is a team that very much had top 4 expectations, and I really don't think that they're going to be super happy going out, especially in a sweep. But for BLG, you're looking great. Just continue this. If you can continue to generate leads and then also have phenomenal macro and, quite frankly, just outplay your opponent, then you're going to win the next game pretty easily. It's do or die, though, for Weibo. You got to win 3 in a row, but that starts here with game number 3. So who's going to be able to take it? Is Weibo going to be eliminated, or are they going to show a little bit of fight and at least pull 1 game back? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take game number 3 in dominant 23-minute fashion, and they're able to take the series in a clean sweep. I believe this is our first clean sweep of the LPL playoffs, and man, it is a bad one for Weibo Gaming. This has got to feel incredibly disappointing to have your split end the way that it did here, but for BLG, I mean, this team is looking awesome. They look completely reinvigorated. A lot of their players are playing at an incredibly high mechanical level, which gives me a lot of confidence that they can actually continue this kind of success, but let's go ahead and talk about what happened in the game before we talk about the grand picture of things. Weibo actually does get first blood in the bot lane, but man, do they use absolutely everything to get it. Karsa's down bot, Light's down bot, Crisp is down bot. I think all 3 of them flash, and they are able to pick up the kill onto On, but it's just, is it really that worth it? Like, because now, all of a sudden, you have no pressure in the bot lane. Elk and On are completely ahead in everything that's been going on in the bot lane, 2v2 throughout the entire series, and that does not change here in game number 3, even with the kill onto Light early, and so that's not particularly good. We have a little bit of a macro game kind of going back and forth with Weibo, trying to make that play bot lane, and then Ygal just saying, screw it, I'm going to leave lane against the Annie, because what do I really do against Annie? I'm going to go top lane, and I'm going to kill the Shy, and that's exactly what happens. Continued kind of taking advantage of the Shy's bad positioning here on Cassante. Ygal with a really nice roam timer to be able to pick that up. And the game's relatively even. Elk and On do pick up a nice 2v2 kill in the bot lane. Like I said, they were able to generate like that lead on their own. And I think in the isolated 2v2, they were doing a good job being able to just straight up win. But they were a little bit too far forward because Karsa and Xiaohu were basically on the way down to 4-man them. And On ends up sacrificing his life. But it ends up just being a 1-for-1, which I think is still relatively fine for BLG in the long run. Crisp roams up to mid to try and get vision, I think, around the Herald play. He dies doing something. He's just kind of standing there, and then, the rest of the team collapses on him. I'm not exactly sure what was going on. There were a couple plays by Crisp that were kind of like that this game. This was not a very good game 3 from Crisp in that support position, but Weibo is able to pull a lot of gold back in the mid game through repeatedly getting picks, I would say, on members of BLG. Whether it's June, whether it's Bin, whether it's On, there were multiple times where it was just like, oh, okay, well, 1-for-0 in favor of Weibo. That's pretty nice. Unfortunately, because of all of that, BLG was just getting everything on the map. A lot of towers, a lot of objectives, and that was the trade that BLG was very happy to go ahead and make. They were even able to pull back some kills after a nice pick in the bot lane from Weibo. They were able to pull it back, I think getting 2 more, killing Karsa in response. But generally speaking, you were entering a lot of these team fights knowing that BLG was still pretty far ahead, even though Weibo was picking up, these picks here or there. It's because BLG was just getting more gold around the map than Weibo was getting from a lot of these kills, and their macro was just so much better, and we definitely saw that once the team fight phase started, which just became unstoppable for BLG. Elk was way too strong. If he had White Gun, it was over. Like, there was literally nothing Weibo could do. Some fantastic ultimates coming out from the Aphelios this game. Blue ult was massive. One of the Infernum ults was just, completely destroyed the enemy team basically immediately. But even outside of that, Elk's positioning was just so ridiculously beautiful. Not only in the first fight, but in the final fight to end the game. I have written in my notes, oh my god, Elk is so freaking good. That's the note that I had for the final fight of the game, where I remember, like, it's in that top lane right around tier 2 tower top lane where Elk perfectly flashes over the wall, immediately ults, and then kites out perfectly, ends up getting like a quadra kill. It's just like, Jesus, dude, this guy's so ridiculously good. He's so good. And Bin was also really good. I don't want to take that away from him. Elk was awesome, and he's player of the game, as you can see, but Bin was also really good on this cannon, being able to absorb a lot of pressure, and those ultimates were massive. I mean, he was able to completely shut down Weibo in a lot of these fights, really set the Aphelios up to teamfight a lot easier, but man, it really was Elk's game, and that's really what it ended up being. Elk's gonna get player of the game for me, like I said. The positioning is just masterful. I mean, he has completely dominated the league over the course of 2023. He was a top 3 MVP candidate for me, and he's really showing why in the playoffs. He hasn't been any worse. In fact, I think you could argue he's been even more mechanically dominant in the playoffs than he was in the regular season, but he's able to generate consistent 2v2 leads basically against anybody with any champion. Like, he should not be winning as Aphelios and Tavares early, but he was just better, so he was. And then his team fighting is just unparalleled. It was like that on WE. It was kind of like that on Ultra Prime as well. It's just the team around him kind of sucks, so they never got to that part of the game. But Elk has always been this good. It's just really good to see him have a team around him that can actually, like, push him forward. Really big support gap in this series. On was really good, even if his scoreline doesn't show it in this game. And Bin was also great. June dominated the jungle matchup. I mean, massive jungle gap in my opinion, and Yagao was everywhere on the map. He might have been down in gold, but he was way up in pressure, and he was allowing the rest of his team to be able to generate a lot. It's basically exactly what Yagao has done for the past year or so, but this BLG team is good. Like, not just, like, okay. Like, they are really, really good. This is a legitimate threat to go to MSI from the LPL. Like, they really are playing in that kind of form right now. Especially if Bin and Elk can continue playing like this, they could be one of the most dangerous teams in the entire world. Like, a legit top 2, top 3 team in the entire world. Like, that's their ceiling, and that's kind of what they're playing like right now. And for them to absolutely dismantle Weibo Gaming like this, I mean, it's impressive stuff. For Weibo, though, your split is now over, and man, this was the worst performance of any team in the playoffs so far, and that's just disappointing to say, because Weibo had such high highs in the regular season. They took down JD Gaming. They went, really, really close with teams like EDG. Like, this was not a team that I think a lot of people expected to be just kicked out of the playoffs by BLG. We all kind of thought that they were going to be able to get their shit together for playoffs, but that was just not the case. They did not show up today at all. Dead of the game is going to go to Crisp. Already talked about that one play in the mid lane where he just, like, was kind of standing there and just ended up dying. Don't really know what was ending up happening. Obviously, we can't always know what's going through players' heads. There's a lot of moments that look weird on broadcast because of the way the spectator cam works, but obviously they had an idea. I just don't know what that was for Crisp in that moment. And then obviously the missed hook on Vigar in that top lane skirmish to end the game was just disastrous. Like, I don't know how you could possibly miss that hook, but he did miss it. It was just a really bad game from Crisp. He's a good player who just had a really bad game. I don't want to dog on him too much because you're allowed to have a bad game every once in a while. It was just really bad timing to have that bad game. I think the player that is going to get overlooked the most for kind of being bad this series is Karsa in the jungle. I like Karsa, and I still think that he is underrated by the community as a whole for what he was able to do in the regular season, but this series did not prove that point at all. He was not good in the jungle matchup. He was able to find some picks, especially in game number 3, but outside of that, like, the macro game was just disastrous, and a lot of that was Karsa just being in wrong spots all series long. I thought Light's positioning was kind of poor, and his aggression was negative in this series. The Shy got completely outclassed by Bim, and Xiaohu in the mid lane was at least able to generate some leads, but what did that turn into? Absolutely nothing. I don't really know what to say about this Weibo Gaming team. They do concern me. Like, they have the upside to be a top 2 team in the league. We've been talking about that all split long, and as a unit, I still think that they can get there. I don't know what you need to change. The inconsistency and the feast or famine-ness of this team is just way too high for me to ever feel comfortable calling them a team that I feel good about going into the playoffs. It doesn't matter how good their highs look when their lows look, worse than a lot of other teams. And so I don't really know what you do for Weibo, but unfortunately your split is now over and you've got a lot to think about moving into summer. But for BLG, the tough tasks lie ahead now. I know Weibo was tough. I know RNG wasn't a cakewalk, but it's only going to get worse from here as you're now going up against the single best team in the entire league, which we will obviously preview at the end of this video. But for now, big ups to BLG. They looked really good in this series and honestly might be a dark horse to upset a few teams later on in the playoffs. But that's going to go ahead and bring us now to our second series of the video here, our second series of round number 3. And this one is just as interesting. I talked about how, Series 1 should have been close. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Well, Series 2 should also be close. Hopefully, this one a little bit more proactive from both teams. We have the number 3 seeded LNG Esports taking on the number 6 seeded, oh my god. I'm really excited to see this series. OMG is obviously a personal favorite if you followed the channel for a while, not for any particular reason other than the way that they play the game. They're just very fun to watch. They are a team that it's really hard not to root for. A lot of young players that this organization has built and cultivated and brought in, and then, a nice veteran in PP God to kind of lead them, and it's really good to see them in the top 6 confirmed, but they've got an opportunity to push themselves into the top 4. A big win over Top Esports in the previous round in round 2 that I didn't see coming. I thought TES should have been able to take that series, but OMG proving to not be pushovers. Hopefully they can continue to play their game that they really excelled at playing in that series. I kind of dissuade a lot of the criticism that had been, thrown at them over the course of the year so far, such as small champion pools, with the idea of it's not really, you can't call it a small champion pool if you can't ban it out. Like, if you cannot ban all of the champions that are in the small champion pool, it's not a small champion pool. So, I think that stands here, and I think LNG certainly has a task ahead of them, but this team finished 3rd in the regular season for a reason. I will say, I was very concerned about LNG in my playoff primer video. If you haven't checked that one out, go check that one out. My LPL playoff primer video, I talk about LNG, and I was honestly a little bit concerned about how they were going to do in best of 5s in particular, because this is a team almost more so than any other team in the league that relies on its stars. They rely on Tarzan, they rely on Scout. Zeke has been good in the top side, but LP and Hang are not like a superstar caliber bot lane, especially a top 3 caliber bot lane, and so you're really going to need your players to step up, and OMG, maybe the team that can kind of take advantage of that. Unfortunately, they don't have like a particularly strong bot lane either. Jungle mid is probably going to define a lot of what ends up happening in this series. I predicted LNG, I believe, in 5. I could have said in 4 as well, though. But LNG was my prediction. I'm not super confident in that, just as I was not confident in that in my previous one with BLG Weibo Gaming. I think these two teams are very close, and if OMG does get out to an early lead, like, I think that momentum could very much be on their side with how they played against TES. So it's going to be interesting, but let's go ahead and go game by game, starting off with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was OMG. They are able to take the first game in this series and go up 1-0. Absolutely massive for them, but this game was a blast. When we talked about BLG, WBG, we talked about 3 games that were pretty in favor of one particular team. Well, game 1 has already added to the suspense level of this video by tenfold with how much suspense was in this game. OMG is able to take it, but it certainly was not an easy game for them. They actually go down pretty early on in the game, and they really don't have a good early game at all. LNG is in a really strong position to just be able to end this game. They're about, 6-7k gold up. And unfortunately, they're just not able to close it out. OMG, with some of the best team fighting that we have seen all playoffs long up until this point. I mean, they just played fantastic in this game towards the back half, but you can't take it away from LNG. Let's go ahead and talk about what ended up happening. It was a relatively slow early game. For the first 5 minutes of the game, both teams just kind of feeling each other out, I would say. Not really trying to test the limits too much, but eventually, Cream overestimates his ability to be able to survive after we see Tarzan invade the enemy OMG team and steal the blue, and, we see him path towards mid lane. Cream continues to push up because he feels safe on the Silas. Unfortunately, just overestimates it, and he gets first blooded. But that's kind of the start of LNG being able to take some advantages. OMG does fight back. Aki with a good play to get Scout in the jungle, but Abel with a really tragic play in the bot lane. He goes for the solo kill onto LP, but he tries to predict the flash with his ultimate, and unfortunately just doesn't get the flash. He doesn't predict it right, and he ends up going down in the 1v2 that he probably just should have won had he just not overthought it a little bit. But LNG with that kill is now able to actually team team fight relatively well. There's a big fight around Dragon that LNG is able to pick up 4 kills and the Dragon in, and it just feels like, okay, well, LNG is going to be able to take control from this point onwards. And they kind of were. They get a nice pick onto PP God in the enemy jungle where it's just like, what is he doing? He's completely inting the game away. And then LNG just goes straight for Baron. They feel pretty confident about that right after the pick on PP God. They end up getting the Baron. They go for the fight afterwards. They get 2 kills, and it's like, okay, well, they're just going to close the game out. They've got Baron. They're up in gold. They're up in kills. Unfortunately, team fights don't always go your way if you take them at a bad time. LNG was going for Dragon. This was either 3rd or 4th Dragon for them. Or of the game, I should say, and they go for it. Unfortunately, great team fight from OMG, a phenomenal ultimate from Shanji to be able to set up Aki and Cream and able to be able to deal a ridiculous amount of damage, and OMG starts to get some gold back. It's like, okay, you're down 6k gold, but you were able to win a big fight there. Then we get a big Baron fight that's well played by both teams, but LNG is able to get it, and you're like, okay, well, LNG's now got 2nd Baron. They should be able to win every single fight from this point onwards, and they do kind of win that. They get a really nice pick in the jungle. Scout gets a really nice seismic shove onto Aki, I believe, and they're able to pick him off, and it's like, okay, you know, how are you going to be able to, you know, deal with this? Elder's going to be on the table in just a second. The jungler gets picked off, but OMG ends up waiting it out. They end up playing perfectly on the edge of danger. They end up getting Aki back into the fight, and the Elder spawns, and Abel's actually able to claim the Elder. They're able to get the team fight, and then OMG get the Baron, and then they ace LNG in the fight, and then the game is over, and it's like, man, this was just, it was so back and forth. It was really well played by OMG in general. Player of the game for me is going to go to Cream from a lot of those late game team fights. He was not all that good during the early part of this game, but man, he was basically perfect, I would say, over the last 10 to 15 minutes of the game. What a phenomenal team fighting stage for him. Yes, he got the Silas, and people are going to be like, oh, I can't believe they gave him the Silas, but look at the bans on LNG. They banned out the Aphelios. You kind of have to. It's Abel's best champ. You banned out the Kennen and Rumble. You kind of have to. Shanji has obliterated everyone he's played on that. And you ban out the Ahri, which is Cream's best champion. Like, I don't really know what else you want to take off the board in order to get that Silas. You probably do end up taking something off the board, but it's not like it was easy, and even then, you're still leaving up things like the Akali. Like, Cream's champion pool is not small, especially with the way that OMG plays. You can't respect Cream and also respect everybody else on the team when it comes to bans, and so him getting a Silas, he proves his worth in the team fighting stage, but tons of credit to everybody on OMG. I think they all played their part here. Shanji with some phenomenal ults towards the back half of the game. I was criticizing his Sion in the TES series, if only just because it felt like he was significantly less proactive on that champion than he was on, like, Rumble or any of these more aggressive picks, or Kennen or Cassante, or even, you know, these Narm, you know, these more aggressive tanks even. But this was a really good Sion game. He definitely proved his worth on it in this one. Those ultimates were fantastic towards the back half of the game, and just sponging up a ton of damage was super useful for the Xayah. Aki with some awesome engages. His early game was actually pretty good. He was the one keeping the game alive, I would say, for OMG during the midsection of this game when everybody else was just kind of meh. Abel was awesome in this game. I think he was, like, underratedly really good. Definitely better than LP, in my opinion. He had some amazing mechanical plays. Some mishaps as well, like I said, trying to predict that flash, but generally was really good. And PP God was really the only one that made some questionable plays throughout the game, but LNG also did try to give everything to kill him in the mid lane and end up giving a ridiculous amount of gold back to OMG, so that's definitely in his favor. But OMG looking really good, specifically in the team fight portion of this game. And then for LNG on the other side, it's frustrating. You really wanted to walk out of this with a game 1 win. Certainly the series is not over from here, and I don't think you played bad at all. But some things you can fix. You need to be able to close out games a little bit cleaner. You took way too long to finish the game here. You've got a strong Jax, you've got a strong Talia, you've got a strong Zeri. You can force stuff in the mid game. Unfortunately, all the stuff that they were forcing was bad. They were going for that pick on PP God in the mid lane that ended up costing them. They were going for even 5v5 fights around objectives. These aren't the plays that you want to be going for when you are up so much gold. You need to be forcing the game outside of these objectives as well, and unfortunately, they just weren't doing it, but the early game was great, and the mid game was really good too. I think Scout's going to get undervalued because of his scoreline, but some of his seismic shoves in this game were phenomenal. I think all of his ults were great. I think for the most part, he was probably the best player on LNG, but Tarzan had some really good ultimates on the Sejuani. Zika blew up some team fights on the Jax. LP had some good positioning on the Zeri that unfortunately just didn't translate much when Abel was able to pop off, and unfortunately, I've got to give a dud of the game, so for me, it's going to go to Hang, if only just because he was the least memorable player on LNG. I think everybody else on the team had good moments, but I can't really remember a big Nautilus engage or a big hook that kind of changed the team fight. I don't think he played particularly bad. He certainly didn't make any major mistakes like Nautilus sometimes can, but I also don't think that he was like a big driving force for the team. Unfortunately, LNG just wasn't able to take it in the 5v5s, and that was the difference here. I certainly think that they can bounce back from this, but you certainly got to in game number 2. You do not want to go down 2-0. We just saw how difficult it is to go down 2-0 in a series and be able to come back. But for OMG, keep the pace rolling. I like the idea of being able to play for late game, but if you're able to win the early game as well, like you were in a lot of the top esports games, if you know you can do this in the late game in the team fights as well, you're going to be so utterly dominant and so difficult to beat. And so this is a very, very dangerous team that LNG certainly cannot take lightly. But is OMG going to be able to take the 2-0 series lead, or is LNG going to tie the series up at 1 apiece? Well, the winner of game number 2 was OMG. They are able to win game number 2 as well and go up into this series 2-0, a commanding lead that puts them in a phenomenal place to be able to move on to that. A place that I don't think a lot of people, even the highest, on OMG at the beginning of the season, were predicting for them, me included. I had them at number 6 in my power rankings, and, I was the highest person that I saw in the power rankings. To see this team be 1 game away from being top 4 is just awesome, and they deserved it in this one. And really, it's hard to talk about this game without bringing up the prodigy that is finally kind of making good on a lot of the expectations that this mechanical god had in the bot lane in Abel. We've been talking about it for so many years. He's one of the most mechanically talented ADCs in the LPL, and that is saying something. It's not like that region struggles for ADC talent. He's just not been able to put it together at a consistent level over the course of the last few years, but man, was he good in this game. So many winning plays coming out from this Xayah Rakan. They dominated the early 2v2, like when we're talking about the game timeline, the early 2v2 in the bot lane was really what kicked things off for OMG. They were able to get first blood right off the bat in the 2v2 because Abel is playing super far forward and Hang is really punishable. And then Hang gets caught again by another nice knockup by the Rakan, and Abel is able to follow up on it. And from that point onwards, the Xayah is so far ahead of the Zeri that really their damage in this game is not even remotely equal, even with LP playing relatively okay. I will say, it wasn't like the cleanest victory in the world from OMG. It certainly wasn't just dominating quite like any of the games in the first series that we talked about, but OMG definitely looking good. After those 2 kills, nice trade back in the Dragon fight to even up the gold for LNG. They really needed that. If they were going to go down any further, it probably was going to be a little bit of a stomp, but a fantastic Cream ult destroys LNG around Rift Herald. They go for the Rift Herald fight, and a really good Yone ult coming out from Cream. Again, you're looking at the picks and bans from LNG. Some people are going to criticize maybe not banning out the Yone or something like that, but, Aphelios, you got to take it off the board. Kennen and Rumble, you got to take it off the board. Silas and Ari, like, I get why you take it off the board. There's just not enough bans in the game to be able to get Cream and Shanji and Abel on things that they're not comfortable on, and that still leaves up something like Maokai for Aki. Like, the Wukong on the other side, Tarzan has to take that away, basically, in order to make sure that Aki doesn't get it. Like, the draft flexibility is much, much better than people give it credit for on OMG, and they absolutely took advantage of that. But Cream is awesome on this Yone, and he had a couple really good ultimates this game. PP God finds a nice pick on Hang right before the Dragon fight that lets OMG, I think, get, like, 2nd or 3rd Dragon basically for free. And then I have written in my notes, oh my god, Cream Yone is so ridiculously good. They win a fight at Herald, even if Shanji ints. That's exactly in my notes, and that's kind of what happened. Shanji just kind of runs it down. He ends up going way too far after a really good Herald fight from OMG that Cream ends up hitting like a 4-man knockup in, and then PP God follows that up with a nice knockup, and Abel's able to kill them all, and Shanji's like, well, yeah, we keep going, and he ults, I think it's Scout underneath the mid lane turret and just dies, like, basically for no reason, but still, OMG's in a really commanding spot. I will say, LNG does fight back a bit towards the back half of this mid-game. This is where I started to get a little bit concerned with OMG. I think LNG started to punish some of the over-aggression just a little bit too much. Top lane, that was definitely the case. They look for this big pick play. Cream gets caught out, and so they send Shanji in on the teleport. They have Aki come in with ultimate, but they're just too far forward, and they end up getting caught out for that. And then a really good Dragon fight for LNG actually brings this really close, I believe, like, within 1k gold towards the back half of this game, but a massive choke point fight coming out from OMG, and another really big big Yone ult to be able to secure some things. And they get Baron. They're able to end the game off of that. Just some really good stuff coming out from OMG. But player of the game was no question Abel. Like, I really didn't have to think about it all that much. The scoreline honestly doesn't represent how good he was in this game. 12, 2, and 11 is a really good scoreline, but he was more impactful than this. The mechanics were incredibly on display in this one. His Xayah is incredibly clean. Like, I didn't see this in the regular season. He was kind of bad on Xayah in the regular season, if I'm being honest. Or at least he wasn't like what he is on Samira and Aphelios and like his top champions. But this game kind of proved that wrong. He was awesome in lane. He was awesome out of lane. He was the driving force for OMG, even though I'm talking about the Yone ultimates all the time. But big credit to Cream for that same vein for those Yone ultimates. They were massive. Being able to set up a lot of plays for OMG was, you know, really important. Being able to have that lockdown CC to pair with the Rakan and with the Maokai and even with the Cassante to an extent is just super important. But PP God had a much better game here in game 2. Not that he was bad in game number 1. He was just kind of inconsistent with the plays that he was making. There was no inconsistency with this one. This was an elite level performance coming out from the Rakan. And obviously his shot calling has improved this team's late game so much. Aki had great engages. Shanji hinted a couple of times, but for the most part was still really good on Cassante. Again, this is just OMG playing at a really high level. Abel and PP God especially. If this bot lane continues to play well, this series is going to be pretty easy for them. But then for LNG on the other side, just bad. Like, this game was worse than game 1. Game 1 was pretty back and forth, and you had moments in this game. Like I talked about, you know, you were able to punish some over-aggression towards the back half of the game. Scout in particular, I thought, made some pretty good plays. LP had some good positioning, even if he wasn't really dealing all that much damage. But the rest of the team was just simply too heavy to carry. Dead of the game for me is going to go to Hang. He was miserable in laning phase. I mean, this was an atrocious Annie game. In laning phase, he was getting caught out being way too over-aggressive. It just didn't feel like he was all that comfortable playing the Annie. He didn't know the ranges. He certainly didn't know how to feel comfortable with the short range that Annie offers, and he just ended up being a target more than anything. He was done of the game in game 1, but game 2 was significantly worse for him, in my opinion. But Tarzan also had another really bad game here. He's not really been all that good through the first 2 games. I thought he was okay in game 1, but he really was not all that positive for them here in game number 2. Hopefully he's going to be able to turn that around. I talked about this in my preview for this series. You need your stars to step up for LNG because you don't really have a lot of secondary carries on this team. Tarzan not having a good series is pretty disastrous for LNG, and unfortunately that seems to be the case. Zika picking Malphite because he feels like he can play it into the Yone Cassante Xayah, which generally speaking I would agree with, but he was missing ultimates left and right, just some bad mechanical plays. Overall, LNG just needs to figure it out. It feels like this team is just not playing all that well because Tarzan's not playing all that well. The fact that this jungle matchup is not going in favor of LNG has been pretty disastrous for this team, and this is what I was worried about. If Tarzan and Scout can't just win games early on like they had been in the regular season, is this team going to be able to compete with these teams that are a little bit more complete? And right now, the answer to that question is no. Now, obviously, they can still come back. It's going to be incredibly difficult. There's like a 97% win rate for teams that go up 2-0 in playoff series across the world, but you know, LNG's a talented team. They can for sure win 3 games in a row against a team like OMG, but they got to get their act together now. As for OMG, great start to the series. You're 1 game away from top 4. You just got to be able to close it out here. Obviously, losing the next couple of games isn't disastrous, but being able to close it out early is going to be better than anything else. And so both teams probably want to win this game 3 pretty badly. Who's going to be able to take it? Is LNG going to stay alive, or is OMG going to seal the fate of the number 3 seed here in the LPL? Well, the winner of game number 3 was LNG. They are able to take game number 3, and they're able to stay alive in this series, which is massive. Of course, losing this meant your split is over, and so big win coming out from them, and it was, generally speaking, just a good game. I would say overall, a lot of positives coming out from LNG and a much more cohesive, I would say comprehensive performance than anything they gave in the first 2 games, even if I think that they were relatively competitive. This just felt like a full-blown performance coming out from the team. They definitely all showed up. I would say that there were a couple of players that I was still a little bit worried about, at least in terms of like early laning performance, but most of that was swept under the rug because this team actually fought very beautifully in the mid game, which I think was kind of their strength throughout most of the year. It's good to see them kind of capitalize on that. But what ended up happening in this game? Well, it actually started with some OMG advantages. Aki with a couple of really good ganks in the mid lane, some perfectly timed ones. He gets first blood onto Scout with some really nice pathing. Just a really smart gank, a phenomenal gank coming out from him on the Sejuani. It's unavoidable at that point. Scout really can't do anything about that. And then he continues to get bullied hard in the early game by Aki. Just continuous pressure coming out from the Sejuani. Really trying to get this Ahri behind and this Yone ahead, which I think is a good strategy in this game, except for the fact that Malphite is going to be a little bit of a problem. You look at this comp in general for OMG, and they don't really have a lot of good answers to Malphite if Zika plays well. We'll get to that in a bit. Now, OMG's going into kind of the early mid-game with a small advantage, but an advantage nonetheless, and so you're looking for LNG to try and force a way to get that gold a little bit more even, and OMG goes really, really aggressive in bot river that LNG disengages incredibly well. A great disengage coming out from them. They're able to go 1-for-0 in that fight, and while it doesn't completely change the entire tide of the game, it's a really nice play that kind of sets up LNG, and I think it's just kind of the start of a lot of things. Really patient play, but really well executed play coming out from LNG there, and then they go and execute a beautiful dive on 3 members in the mid lane using all 5. This is a very rare macro advantage from LNG in the series. We really haven't seen that all that much in the first couple of games. It's been OMG who have made a lot of the really good macro decisions, even if I do think LNG hasn't been particularly bad at that, but it's good to see them make a really proactive play, catching out 3 members of OMG in the mid lane and then establishing a pretty large lead for themselves. Shanji trades his life for a solo kill, and then we get a really, really big dragon fight that LNG just absolutely destroys. And this is where the game really becomes LNG favored. This is where things start to go in favor of them. OMG does, get some back a bit on an LNG int in the bot lane when they're, they've got Baron, they've got Soul, and not Soul, just Dragon, and they're really trying to, just force something, and they all run into the bot lane tier 2 tower and just kind of die, and it's like, okay, well, not really sure why they did that. It did give OMG an opening, but the 50-50 at Baron after that ends up going the way of LNG, and then they just kind of win the fight and end the game, and so I would say good stuff from LNG overall. A couple of, hiccups in the back half of the game there. The dive in the bot lane was just not very good. It was very inty. There was no way that play was ever going to work out. And then obviously you don't really want a 50-50 a Baron where you're up in gold towards the back half of the game, but at least you were able to get it and you were able to win the fight afterwards, and that's really all that matters in the end. My player of the game is going to go to LP in the bot lane, which is such a good thing to say. It felt like Abel was kind of doing all that he wanted in the first couple of games of the series, and so to see LP come out and look really, really good in game number 3, be the big damage dealer for LNG, and really step up as someone they can count on in a lot of these team fights, that's really good. That's really, really, really good and really important for them. I don't think that they're going to be able to win this series without LP stepping up and, quite frankly, just being the better bot laner between these two teams. And so to see it at least once here in Game 3 is great. Hopefully he can continue doing it. I have a lot of positive notes in here for Tarzan as well. This was simply just a much better game from him than anything he did in the first 2 games. I was very critical of how he played the beginning part of this season, or this series, and I do think that Game 3 definitely showed that he can still be a really proactive player. I think getting blue side for LNG is a positive because they can ban out the Aphelios, they can ban out the Rumble, they've always banned out the Kennen here, and they can still first pick the Wukong, and so you essentially get that extra ban onto OMG as well there, but I think Tarzan does capitalize on that really well, even if he does give over a little bit of early pressure to the Sejuani. He's able to kind of rebound it, some really good engages towards the back half, and he's able to do a lot with it. I think Zika was a lot better in this one as well. He was actually hitting ultimates on the Malphite, but the Malphite was just higher value in this game because look at the comp on the side of OMG. They really don't have a lot of good answers to it. They've got the Sedge, they've got Xayah, I guess, Yone, Cassante, none of them are really going to be doing anything into a full armor Malphite, and that ended up being a pretty big problem for OMG to kind of break through. And so generally speaking, LNG had a win condition, and they just played to it. They were able to win a lot of fights in the mid game and translate that success into closing out the game, even if it wasn't the most efficient thing in the entire world. The fact that they were able to do it at all is certainly something to be positive about. But as for OMG on the other side, not exactly what you wanted to happen in a Game 3 where you were up 2-0, but, you're not going to be freaking out over this loss. You've still got 2 games to close out this series. You're going to be a little bit concerned. Abel's going to get my dud of the game. He didn't have a particularly good game after what was a phenomenal game number 2, but again, it's just one game, and playing Zyrakan into Zeri Lulu, you should be able to win that early, but if you don't, the Zeri's just going to be more useful than you if she has more gold. There's no way to kind of outplay that. Zeri's one of those champions that if she's executed correctly, there's nothing you can do on the other side to really deal with that if she has a lot of gold. I do think there were positives. I thought Aki and Cream still looked really good as a duo. They didn't exactly do a ton towards the back half of the game, but I think their early game dominance was really good, and they seem to have very good chemistry playing together in this series, which can sometimes fluctuate for this OMG team. Shanji's been put on a little bit of weak side, I would say, over the course of the series. Cassante, Sion, we've kind of seen a lot of these more passive picks. Obviously, things like the Rumble and the Kennen have just been banned out against him, so it's not really a lot of options on the table, but you know, I think maybe going to something a little bit more aggressive in the top lane could be positive for this OMG team. We saw how well that worked against Top Esports, and it's certainly not something you can take out of their bag, especially if Zika's going to go something like Malphite. You yourself ban the Gwen. That could be a pretty good answer here to a lot of the things that I think LNG are doing. But outside of that, just stick to the plan. Like, you still know how to play. You still know how to win. You just weren't able to do it in this game. I don't think that the strategy and the execution behind everything was completely off. I still think that games 1 and 2 were a little bit more convincing than game number 3 for me, but it certainly is worth looking into that if things still aren't going well, you might want to, you know, try to add a little bit of spice, I would say, to what you're going for here. But for LNG, it's just about continuing to stay alive. Obviously, losing is donezo, and so you can't do it. You know, winning game 3 is great, but now you got to win game 4, and you've also got to win game 5. Like, it doesn't stop here. You got to keep your foot on the gas, and you know, hopefully those ending mistakes in the back half of the game aren't going to be too detrimental to their mental. But who's going to go ahead and take game number 4? Is LNG going to continue to try and make this comeback? Or is OMG going to prove that game 3 was a little bit of a fluke? Well, the winner of game number 4 was OMG. They are able to take game number 4, and they're able to close out this series and officially punch their ticket to the top 4 in the LPL. The Young Guns have done it. They have proven their worth. They have beaten 2 very legitimate teams in Top Esports, and now in LNG Esports as well, to make their way into that top 4. And no one can say that they do not deserve it anymore. They have played awesome, and they've done everything that they need to do. All of their players have stepped up at various points, and they played this game 4 really, really well. I'm incredibly proud of this team. I'm very much welcoming all of the bandwagoners that are going to be, hopefully, hopping on to the OMG hype train over the next, I don't know, couple of weeks, maybe couple of days. I've been on it since about 2021, as this channel will tell you. I've been massive fans of players like Cream in particular, but even players like Shanji and Abel to an extent, I've been very big fans of, and I've been calling for an OMG breakout for so long, and it finally came to fruition this split, with them surpassing all expectations and just being a one of the best teams in the world, quite frankly. There really is no other way to put it. A top, you know, 5-ish team in the entire world. They are in that category right now, which is so ridiculous. But what ended up happening here in game 4, and how were they able to close it down? Well, it was a rather dominant game from OMG. They really just controlled the entire pacing of everything. Really, there wasn't a lot that LNG could do in this game to actually keep pace with them. Very first Dragon fight was really the big, like, I don't know, tipping point of the game, or at least the first big action point of the game. It very much went in favor of OMG. It was a pretty slow fight, but Cream did so much work on the backline, basically zoning out LP like on his own, and I think picking up a kill by himself, but he eventually gets taken down, and it ends up being a 1-for-1, but OMG gets Dragon, and Cream already starting to show that it was a mistake to give him the Akali. And then, Shanji ends up just walking into the jungle and solo killing Tarzan, because why not? Like, if you find the jungler at low health, you're gonna kill him, and Shanji was able to get some free gold for that. That clearly made Tarzan mad, because he made it his entire mission to try and get this Kennen behind, basically from that point in the game onwards. You know who that, you know, affected in a negative way? The freaking Draven in the bot lane, who got 0 assistance from his jungler the entire game. I don't really have a reasoning behind this. Clearly, it must have been Tarzan had some vendetta against Shanji. I guess getting the Kennen behind could be a good thing, but the Kennen's going to be useful basically no matter what, and getting Malphite ahead really doesn't do all that much for you, so ignoring the Draven just makes even less sense. But Tarzan does go top lane to dive Shanji. They're able to pick up the kill, but a really good rotation coming out from OMG nets Cream a double kill in response onto Tarzan and Zika, and from that point onwards, the Akali is just, like, legitimately unstoppable. Cream is uncatchable. He's going in consistently 1v4, 1v5, and being able to survive for, like, 5, 6, 7 seconds, and even longer when you add in the stopwatch. Like, he is legit undealable with, and he can buy so much time for the rest of the team, not to mention the fact that he does a ludicrous amount of damage. There was really no other choice for player of the game. Cream absolutely styled on LNG. This was one of the better, probably the single best game of the entire series from any player, and I'm really happy to say that about Cream. He was really good in the series. He's not only going to get my player of the game, he's going to get my player of the series here against LNG. He was player of the game in game 1, player of the game here in game number 4, but this game 4 was just disgusting to watch. Cream is one of those players that I have been beating the drum for. I mean, like, oh my god, I imagine fans of my channel that watch all my LPL content are so annoyed by now with me talking about Cream, because I have been so high on him for so long, and I have continued to show him a ridiculous amount of support for so many years. Basically, ever since he debuted in the LPL, I was like, this kid's going to be the next superstar. I think he could theoretically be a better version of, like, Zeka over in the LCK, who I also really love. But, like, that's the kind of ceiling that you're looking at. Like, Cream, in my opinion, is a player that if he continues to grow, could win a world title. And I think he's starting to show that a bit in the playoffs. He kind of just outplayed, like heavily outplayed, the opposing mid laner, who just so happens to be my pick for MVP this split. Like, he has been ridiculous in this playoff run, just generally so far, but this series was a new level. Obviously, there was that rumor that LNG had agreed to a contract with Cream to buy him out from OMG before they realized that Scout was available and basically just called it off so that they could go get Scout. Cream maybe took that a little bit personally because he came out with a vengeance in this one, but certainly wasn't the only player who played well. Shanji had a really good game on the Kennen. They finally let it through. It's the first game in this series that they don't ban the Kennen. They ban the Zeri instead, so Shanji, of course, ends up going for it, and he makes them pay. Those Kennen ultimates were absolutely massive. It's the solo laners for OMG that have created a lot of the hype surrounding this team for me and for a lot of other analysts going into the year, and it's the solo laners that have really paid off a lot of that hype. Obviously, Aki's been really good as well. He was by far the better jungler in this series. It wasn't even really that particularly close. Aki's been really good. To see him just be able to outplay someone like Tarzan, even if Tarzan's actively making a lot of bad plays, I think is a really good sign. And then Abel and PP had a really good series as well. We can't forget that game too, where Abel absolutely popped off. PP with some really good engages, some nice Renata ultimates in this game to get Cream out of some potentially sticky situations. And just generally speaking, this OMG team really functioned as a unit here. This was a team gap. This was not just one or two or three players outplaying their opponents. It was all five really showing up and just being the better players in this series. And then for LNG on the other side, this is a really shitty way for you to end your split. Like, this is not how you want it to go out. Not winning a single playoff series has to be entirely demotivating, but I hate to say I told you so, but, like, I predicted this. This is something that I certainly saw coming. Maybe not in the previous video. I just thought they were going to lose to Top Esports instead of losing to OMG, but I predicted this team being able to struggle in best of fives. They're just not built for best of fives, if we're being entirely honest. They rely so much on their jungle mid duo being able to create pressure in the early to mid game that if that's not happening, if the enemy team is just able to win there, they don't really have a backup option. LP played well in game 3, but still, a lot of the pressure that they were able to generate in that game was from Tarzan being able to move around the map. If they don't have that in the early game, they're just doomed, which is why I think when teams get a little bit more time to prep and, have specific drafts and can go more than 1 or 2 games against this team, that they're going to struggle a bit more. And that came to fruition basically to a T. It was really good analysis for me, not to pat myself on the back, but just like, right? Like, that's my whole point of this, is we saw this coming, and unfortunately all of our fears proved to be true about this team. Tarzan's gonna get dud of the game. He was miserable in this game number 4, got completely out-jungled by Aki in the early game, had no pressure on the ganks, had to completely cede all pressure to objectives very early on in the game, and then got solo killed in his own jungle by the Kennen, ended up throwing away any lead that he could potentially gain on his bot lane that he just completely ignored by perma going top and giving more gold over to the Akali, and then the game just became generally unwinnable for LNG because Tarzan just played with brain off. Like, I really can't even explain it. He had a bad one. Zika was not particularly good in the top lane on the Malphite 3 games in a row. It was decent in game 3, but, games 2 and 4 were just not good. A lot of good counters. I mean, what does Malphite really do into this comp? I mean, hopefully you can ult the Akali, because it's not point and click, but outside of that, you just don't really offer all that much value to the rest of your team. The highest value on the team in terms of these team fights was Hang, and that's only because he had exhaust. And even then, he wasn't even really using exhaust at the right time. Like, there was just not a lot good going for LNG. This is one of their weakest games of the series. I would argue their weakest game of the series, and it just so happened to be their last of the split. Where do I think this team goes from here? I don't really know, man. Like, I don't know what you do. I think you definitely look to bring in a more established bot laner. I do like LP. I think he's someone who can grow into this position. But LNG is one of those teams that is in a position right now to be able to be one of the better teams in the world. If you can get a more consistent bot lane to come in and be an actual power point of the map that you can play to in every game, I think that they're going to be a better team. I know people aren't going to want to hear that because, develop younger talent, but I just don't think that LP is going to be the guy that brings them to Worlds. I think he's going to be holding them back, if only just because the team clearly doesn't trust him to be able to carry. They draft the Draven, but they don't play for the Draven, and that's a damning sign, I would think, in general. Outside of that, I don't think I would make any roster changes. There was a lot of really, really good stuff coming out from this team. Zika improved a lot. Tarzan and Scout were awesome in the regular season, even if they weren't good in the series, and I think Hang is a good player, but LNG really need to get more versatile as a team. If you're relying so much on your jungle mid duo, you're just never going to be a team that can compete with some of the best in the world. And that's what OMG is right now. They are one of the best teams in the world. Of course, we'll preview their round 4 matchup later on in the video, but they have secured themselves top 4. Now they can afford to lose a best of 5 because lower bracket has been initiated, and I'm incredibly excited for them. This really opens up a lot of possibilities for them to, at the very least, get some experience and, or at the very worst, get some experience, and at the very best, potentially even be a team that is moving on to MSI. But that's going to go ahead and move us into our preview section for round number 4 now. We've wrapped up all the analysis for round 3. It's time to move on to what I think might be happening in the next couple of series. There's a lot of really interesting things to talk about. We're going to go series by series, giving you a quick overview of these teams as well as my key matchup for each series. And of course, we're going to start it off with the upper side of the bracket. That means with the number 1 team in the regular season, the number 1 seeded JD Gaming, taking on the number 5 seeded Bilibili Gaming. An intriguing matchup to say the very least. I think this could be a very fun one for both teams on paper. Let's go ahead and talk about where I think these teams match up kind of lane by lane, starting of course with the top lane. 369 taking on Bin, maybe the 2 most talented top laners in the region, not counting the Shy when he's like on, but 369 and Bin might be the 2 that most consistently are able to win on carries. And 369's been kind of relegated to, I would say, tank duty over the course of the year. Bin, not so much. Someone who is going to be able to pick up a lot more aggressive picks. BLG, I think, invests a lot more into their top laner than a team like JDG does, but that's because they know that 369 can survive a bit without those resources. I really don't know which way to point this matchup. I think there is a real case that both of them could win. Bin is talented enough to be able to take down 369, but 369 is also talented enough to just be able to win 1v1 with no assistance. And so I really do think this is going to be entirely matchup based. I don't think there is a big enough skill gap in the top lane for me to even say that one side or the other has a massive advantage here. I think it really is just going to be whoever gets the benefit of the doubt in each draft that I would favor. Jungle's going to be a little bit different. Kanavi versus Shun, and Shun's been really good in the playoffs so far. That's been a very big pleasant surprise for me because I was really low on him coming out of the regular season. I was worried that he was going to be a bit of a problem for BLG in the playoffs, especially going up against some of the other junglers at this level that are just like really, really freaking good, but he's been awesome in the playoffs up until this point. He was really good against Wei, really good against Karsa. Now, caveat, those junglers aren't exactly the most consistent in 2023, but quite frankly, neither is Kanavi. Like, Kanavi has been good over the course of the split. He's definitely been a positive for the team, but he certainly hasn't been the Kanavi that he was in 2022. He's not this blow away, run away, best, jungler in the entire world kind of player. He's still just really control oriented. I would say he's still got some of the best pathing in the entire world. That's what allows him to generate leads in the early game. He's just not being super forceful with a lot of those leads. He's really leaving it up to his laners, which I think for the most part is a good thing. But, a player like June can actually take advantage of some of that, I don't want to say more passiveness, but more supportive gameplay. He does really well into these more supportive junglers as a player, and I think that's something that we could see coming out from BLG, but I would be remiss to not say that Kanavi has the advantage in this matchup. He should just be the better player, and in my opinion, it shouldn't really be all that close. The mid lane matchup is intriguing, though. Knight versus Yagao, a classic matchup here in the LPL. The 2 mid laners that met in the finals last year, Knight versus Yagao, is a lot of fun to watch. 2 very different styles. Knight, a pretty high resource mid laner. Yagao, like the opposite, a very low resource mid laner. But both of them excel in terms of what they're able to do with that. Knight has been sensational on his Syndra. He's the best Syndra in the world. I will take literally no arguments. I don't even think it's debatable. His Jace has been pretty freaking good too. Yagao, you see a lot of Talia, you see a lot of Gallia, you see things like that. The Vigar has been a really big pick for him in the playoffs, and so kind of an apples to oranges kind of thing. It's really hard to compare the two. I think Knight is actively going to give your chance a better, give your team a better chance to win through him. But Yagao is going to make everybody else on the team look a lot better. I think Knight's a slightly better player, but it's really hard for me to say that Yagao is less valuable than Knight, because I don't necessarily think that's true. I think they're just both valuable in different ways. And then we get to the bot lane matchup. I'll talk about the AD carries in a second, but let's talk about Missing versus On. Kind of polar opposite styles here, very similar to the mid lane matchup, except it's backwards. Missing is a little bit more, I would say, supportive, a little bit more facilitative. At least that's kind of how he's fit into the 2023 version of this team. He can be aggressive, he can do well on engagers, but he's mostly been resigned to Ashe duty for poke and lane, or Lulu duty to help with the Zeri, even Yumi a lot, over the course of the split. And so, not necessarily things that are going to be making crazy, game-changing plays, but that's On. You want crazy game-changing plays, that's on BLG. Blitzcrank, Thresh, Nautilus. You want your hook champions. You want him to play Nami as well with the bubbles. Like, he's going to go and try and make an impact. Hell, he even brought out the Leona in the previous series. He's going to play those engagers. He's going to try to make bot lane a little bit more volatile. And he's going to try to skirmish in the mid game. That's going to be kind of a contrast in styles. Again, it's hard to compare the two because they have played so differently over the course of this year, but I would give the benefit of the doubt to Missing probably in that matchup. But that leads me to our matchup of the series, our key matchup, and of course, it's the bot laners here. It's Ruler versus Elk. It's the two best bot laners in the LPL in 2023, in my opinion. Some people would put Gala in that discussion. I think he definitely deserves to be mentioned in that conversation, but Ruler and Elk, for me, were by far the top two players. They were both top 3 in MVP voting, number 2 and number 3, respectively, for their teams, and the stats on the screen, you can see why. I mean, Ruler's 17th in damage percentage. That clearly shows he's the best AD carry in the region. Obviously, I'm joking. He's going to have incredibly low damage percentage because everybody else on his team's doing damage. He's on a super team, but first in gold per minute, first in KDA, 7th in damage per minute. He's doing a lot, especially in the mid game. He's playing like Ruler. He's winning a lot of these games by team fighting and skirmishing really well, even if he's not going to be the most dominant player of all time in the early game. That's not really how JDG likes to play the game. They want to go for these more like isolated skirmish plays. Elk, on the other hand, he's going to be the center of attention every single game for BLG. First in KP percentage for all bot laners. First in damage percentage for all bot laners. First in damage per minute for all bot laners. Second in gold per minute for all bot laners. Like, he is going to be the focal point for BLG, as he has been all split long. And I think that could make for some really intriguing matchups. Ruler is a player that does really well with pressure, but it's going to be interesting to see if that's going to change when he's going up against an AD carry that can really capitalize on a lot of that pressure in a good way. I don't really know which way this bot lane matchup's going to go. Ruler's more consistent as a player, or at least he has the track record to make me believe he's more consistent, but Elk has been a monster this year, and really, he's been playing at that level as a top 3 AD carry in the world. Like, that's the level that Elk is playing at right now, and so if he's able to come out and actively be able to keep up, if not just be better than Ruler, I'm not really going to be all that surprised. He's a really, really good player, and he's shown it all year long. But I'm really excited for this matchup. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. My prediction is JD Gaming. I'm going to say JD Gaming in 4. I think BLG should be able to take a game here. But when JDG wins, man, when they're, locked in, when they're focused, they're just better than any team in the league. And it's going to be really hard for me to vote against that. Even if BLG does come out and win this, which, I hope they have the opportunity to do. It's just hard for me to predict against JDG with what they have shown in their wins throughout the regular season, but this should be an absolute blast of a series, and I'm incredibly excited to watch it. And then our second round 4 matchup, this one might be even more intriguing just because you certainly didn't see these two teams facing off in the playoffs in a lot of people's plans, I would say. But our second matchup in round number 4 is going to be the number 2 seeded Edward Gaming taking on the number 6 seeded OMG. And man, I'm real excited for this series. This is definitely a little bit skewed on paper when you look at the two kind of teams side by side. You can see a lot of all-pro noms, even a lot of first-team all-pro noms on the side of EDG, and only one on the side of OMG. But man, they are looking hot right now, and momentum can mean a lot in these playoff series. So let's go ahead and talk about where I think some advantages could lie. Let's actually go in opposite order this time. Let's start in the bot lane. I think when you look at Leave and Mako versus Abel and PP God, this is the first, big advantage that I would give EDG. I think they really should be able to generate a large lead in this bot lane. Leave has just been one of the most dominating bot laners in lane throughout the entirety of this split. The team does a really good job setting him up for that. Mako in particular does a great job setting him up for that. But he plays a lot of late game team fighters that can just survive the early game, and then man, he just will blast you in team fights. Like, his positioning is near perfect. There's a reason this team has gone to Zeri more than any other champion in the entire game. It's because Leave is so consistent at being able to generate leads on Zeri and then just exploding in the late game. That's going to be a big positive. But Abel does play a little bit of the Zeri, but also plays a lot of the Aphelios. He's certainly not going to be a pushover in the back half of games. We saw a lot of Xayah come out from the team when the Aphelios was banned. It's going to be interesting to see if they continue to play that against a team like EDG. I think that could be a relatively good strategy. Perhaps try to invest into that bot lane, generate an early lead, but I would definitely give the advantage of Leave and Mako versus Abel and PP God to EDG. I think they definitely should be ahead in that matchup. And then you've got Fofo versus Cream. What an intriguing matchup. Last year I would have told you this was Cream not particularly close, but Fofo has had a phenomenal split, has really kind of come out of his shell. A ton of Jace coming out from him in the regular season. A big reason why Jace went up super high in win rate was because of these LPL mid laners, and Fofo was definitely one of them. This team really likes to play around him in the mid lane. They like to make sure he can get on those late game carry team fighting champions. That's kind of a trend that you're noticing with EDG. They like to get to the team fighting stage, and we'll talk about that as a matchup against OMG in particular in a bit. But Fofo versus Cream as an isolated thing, I think if Cream gets early champions that he can generate leads on, which, he's kind of good at those. He can play Yone, he can play Silas, like these champions that kind of want to shove and roam and want to skirmish in the mid game. Perhaps he might be able to generate a lead. I do think mechanically speaking, he's probably right up there with Fofo, but I think Fofo has had a better split overall. I think this is going to be closer than a lot of people give it credit for, but I'm going to give a very, very slight edge to Fofo. And then Jeje versus Aki in the jungle position. This one is Jeje favored. I like Aki. I love Aki. I think he's made a ton of strides over the course of 2023 so far, but Jeje is just on a different plane of existence right now when it comes to junglers, in my opinion. He was no-brainer the best jungler in the LPL in the regular season. Tarzan was the only jungler I thought who could touch him, and Aki just kind of brutalized him, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but Jeje is just really, really good. I would expect Jeje to be able to generate some early leads, but again, Aki just beat Tarzan, like, super cleanly in terms of macro and in terms of pressure. If he can do the same for Jeje, like, OMG is going to be able to generate a really nice lead in these series, and they do a pretty good job of playing from ahead, but that's going to lead me to my final matchup that we haven't talked about here yet, and it's going to be my key matchup of the series. It's going to be top laners, and I don't say that often when it comes to the LPL. Ale versus Shanji. What a matchup here. Two players that I think are super fun to watch, and two of the very rare, I would say, carry-oriented top laners here in the LPL. You can see that from their stats. Ale, third in KP percentage, first in gold per minute, fourth in damage per minute. He's doing a ridiculous amount for this team. Obviously, again, low damage percentage because he plays for a really good team with a lot of really good carries, but, it's not to take away from his ability. Fourth in damage per minute shows that he is doing a lot for the team. He's just maybe not doing it, as much as some of the other players on that team. I know that stat can be a little bit misleading, but Ale was really good. He was my first team all-pro top laner for the regular season, in my opinion, the most dominating one, but I think you can make a really solid case that Shanji has been by far the best top laner in the playoffs up until this point. First in KP percentage, fifth in damage percentage, fifth in damage per minute. I mean, right there, like literally 12 points away in damage per minute. Like, these players were shockingly similar. If Shanji's going to get a lot of the picks that made him famous, the Rumble, the Kennen, things like that he can really take advantage of, maybe even the AP Shyvana in the top lane, like, it's playable right now. I think that is going to be huge for OMG, and if they're able to take a lead up on this top side, if Aki wants to play towards it, or even if Jeje wants to play towards it, like Tarzan did in this series, and it kind of neglects the fact that the mid and bot can get ahead on their own, I do think that this series could be a lot closer than people expect for OMG, but I'm just not necessarily going to predict that to happen. I'm going to pick EDG here to win the series. I'm going to say 3-1, 3-0 as my spread. I think EDG should be the better team. I love OMG to death, but EDG is kind of on a different plane of existence. I think when you look at the way these two teams play, both of them are rather late game focused teams. Neither really like to make like crazy plays in the early game. I'd say OMG likes to do it a tad bit more, but it's not really their style. They're both incredibly strong team fighting teams, and honestly, I just think EDG is better at team fighting, and that's going to be a little bit of a problem for OMG. A big reason they were able to overcome a team like LNG was because LNG relied so much on those early to mid game advantages they were able to generate that when OMG was just kind of out team fighting them towards the back half of the game, they really didn't have a lot of answers to that. I think EDG is going to have a significantly easier time dealing with some of the team fight prowess that OMG offers, but hopefully I'm wrong. Again, I hope this team's team fight is being underrated, and I hope they're able to take EDG to the limit, if not just outright beat them. But if I had to look at this on paper, I would say EDG definitely has an advantage in terms of styles here. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL Round 3 overview and analysis of both series, as well as my previews for Round 4. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comments section below. What do you guys think is going to happen in Round 4? Do you have BLG or JDG? Do you have EDG or OMG? And which teams do you think are really making a solid case to be finals contenders here in the LPL? Maybe some of the ones that you wouldn't expect. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys enjoy the video. It also helps get this video out to a lot more people, which obviously we put a lot of time and effort into these videos. It really would mean a lot to me if you guys did that. And if you're new here, and this is your first SuperKmanrocks video, hit the subscribe button. We don't only cover the LPL on this channel, although if you watch this week, you might get that impression. A lot of LPL games to cover, but we do cover all 4 major regions as well as the NACL on this channel. And so if you're interested in a comprehensive guide of all of the playoff stuff going on in the world of LoL Esports right now, as well as with MSI coming up soon, we're going to be covering that. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you can get the notifications when those videos go live basically every single day. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.